You're listening to Big World Network.
Average, Episode 3, written by Jonathan Thompson, read by Heather Thompson. I hated flying with my dad. Obviously, I wasn't capable of flight myself, so to get me in the air, he had to hold me tightly. This was awkward and embarrassing, and at 16, I didn't need any more reasons to feel awkward and embarrassed. Flight had always been a particularly hard power pill for me to swallow. Self-propelled flights by humans made no sense and were, frankly, offensive to all my nerdly sensibilities. It spat in the face of all we know about aerodynamics. There was no consideration for lift, drag, thrust, or weight. I remember watching my dad take off and being genuinely angry at him because it just shouldn't have worked. He didn't even take a running start. Even if he had, he'd need massive wings to create enough lift to get a 250-pound man off the ground. And to flap those wings, his pecs and lats would have to be huge to the point of freakish, even for a superhero. Of course, Dad was no help in explaining it. When I asked him how he did it, he just looked at me like I was crazy and said, "Like this," and started floating. The best explanation I could come up with is that my dad and probably most of the other flyers out there had some way of manipulating gravity mentally, like they could just shut it off. Considering gravity was still pretty mysterious to me, this theory had the most potential. Although at one point I had theorized that he was inflating a sack of lighter-than-air gas tucked away in his body somewhere, but that wouldn't explain the amount of control he had over his speed and direction, so I gave up on that one. Plus, I really didn't want to think about what sort of exhaust system he would need. I mean, the gas would have to go somewhere, right? "Couldn't we have just taken the car?" I shouted over the wind that rushed past us. "Yeah, because every dynamic duo drives a baby blue mid-size sedan." "Maybe you should just buy a nicer car. Maybe you should just get a job." You'd think that I would know better than to argue with the man carrying me who knows how many feet in the air while traveling who knows how fast. But despite all of my dad's blundering and blustering, I knew he would never even remotely put my life in danger. Which is why going out on patrol with him was so frustrating. It was a farce, a joke, an act. Even if we did find some potentially dangerous situation to try to flesh out my powers, the most powerful man in the world would literally be hovering over me ready to swoop in. If anything, all this night would do is reinforce my crippling confidence in Dad's protective instincts. We had been out for almost 2 hours and were perched atop a building in Peekskill, just waiting. "I don't get it," my dad said in frustration. "This place is usually teeming with some sort of shady goings-on." I gave an empty reply that didn't really include any words and wouldn't actually encourage a conversation. It sounded something like, At the very least, I'd expect some sort of teenage tomfoolery we could break up." "Why are you talking like that? Goings-on? Tomfoolery? You don't like it?" "I thought I'd try on some Victorian elegance, just for a more majestic character." "Oh." I looked out over the small riverside city and was disappointed. Not that there was no dastardly deed that needed undoing, but with myself. I imagined that most people would find this view inspiring and liberating. This was a sentinel's post. It was enlightening and empowering, and I hated it. This was my father's world, a portion of him that I had never seen. I should relish the chance to be part of it, but I was more concerned that someone would see me, that a situation would actually arise and I would become a joke. Having a gang of thugs laugh at me really didn't sound like a fun night. And then there were the papers to worry about. "What time is it anyway? You know I have school tomorrow, right?" 10:47, my father responded. He didn't wear a watch and there were no clocks within view. "How did you know?" "Dunno, just do." So I guess you can add timekeeping to your list of powers. Hey, that's actually a pretty cool one. My buddy Heinrich, he's a horse thief and makes a crazy amount of money just telling the time. You know the atomic clock? Yeah, they set it to him. What? No, they don't. You don't set the atomic clock. It's based on... Okay, this is ridiculous. Dad cut me off. He was pacing now, the way I've seen lions pace in their cages. "Maybe we should just head into White Plains." I had a flush of panic. Dad was getting desperate, flustered enough to step things up, and there was no telling what he would force me into. "Dad," I said, "no, I have school tomorrow." "Psh, school? You don't need a diploma to be a superhero." Dad started floating towards me. This was quickly getting out of hand. "But you do need powers." "Exactly! So back to work." With that, Ultrarian scooped me up, forcing me to rush onward and upward. As the cool air raced over us and stole my breath, I did my best to make myself both heard and understood. "Dad, I want to go home. I don't have any powers, and if you want me to actually do anything with my life, you have to take my schooling as seriously as I do." And then there was silence. I don't know if you've ever experienced a tense silence while soaring a few stories off the ground, but I can't recommend it. The looming threat of death has a way of making already delicate situations all the more uncomfortable. "Fine," my father said with a hint of painful disappointment in his voice. An amazing sensation of relief overtook me when he made a sharp turn in the opposite direction. "We'll just—" But he was cut off by the answer to a burning question that had bothered me since childhood. What would happen if a super collided with a goose in mid-air? I'm not sure if the goose exploded or just careened off into space, but either way, there was no more goose. "Blah!" my father shouted, shaking feathers from his face and hair. "Goose mouth!" As badly as I wanted to laugh, I didn't have time. Row after row, the entire flying V slammed into my father like so many smelly, honking, fluffy missiles. As the assault continued, things crossed a fine line that was often drawn when Ultrarian was involved, from funny into terrifying. He dropped me. I fell amid a rain of goose debris, twisting my body to look upward. Maybe I needed to be able to see my father hurrying to my rescue. Maybe I just didn't want to see the ground anymore. But there was no red and yellow streak coming for me. With the remaining geese noisily trying to collect themselves around him, my father was just watching me. Even as far away as I was already, I could see his face just clearly enough to know what he was doing. He was waiting. "I can't fly!" I screamed. No response, and Dad was rapidly getting smaller. "Oh, come on!" There was a loud, frustrated grunt of, "Ugh!" And then that red and yellow dot that I had been watching so restlessly hurled itself toward me. When Dad finally scooped me up, a tree branch scraped against my leg. "What is—" I started to shout. "Maybe next time we should start higher," Dad said pensively. I didn't bother to say anything else for the rest of the trip home.
Visit BigWorldNetwork.com for more e-series samples, or sign up for a $3 a month subscription for full access to all written and audio e-series content, accessible from the website, mobile, or e-reader devices. Thanks for listening.
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
You're listening to Big World Network.